Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 908. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
I'm George Conger. Today's March 21st, 2025.
All right, welcome. Well, is that how we're going to start off the episode? I'm just going to mispronounce welcome. Welcome to another episode of Anglican Unscripted. I'm glad you could be here. It's a lot of fun. George and I get to sit down and spend time in front of our laptops and talk about the news. And we love doing that. This is something we both look forward to. And every week, the Anglican Communion, the Episcopal Church, and the world delivers something to talk about. It's not like nothing to talk about. Now there's always something to talk about, George. Before we get too far into the program, I'm going to ask that you click that like button. This is the icon they use right here. It's on Facebook, it's on YouTube, and it helps the algorithms out there know that Anglican Unscripted, it's cool, it's hip. It's about as hip as you're going to get for the Anglican Communion. If you've not subscribed yet, there's a little red rectangle. You click that, up pops a bell. You click that bell, and you will be instantly, in theory, notified every time I publish a new Unscripted. Like today, you probably got a notification if you're subscribed. If not, you didn't. Sorry. What else? I'll go to the comment section. That's where the show continues. Lots of good comments on YouTube. You guys are very respectful of each other, and we appreciate that. What else? That's it. Share this with your family and friends if you've not done so. We had some technical issues in our last show, and it got cut short. We didn't get cut short. No. We talked the whole time. But the recording itself stopped. And I don't know what the real issue is. I had a monitor die, and apparently when that monitor died, it shut off the system to record the episode. That's just... You got two old fogies here trying to use high tech to deliver a show, and that's what's going to happen. George, how are you doing this week?
Very busy, very tired. One of the things I mentioned last week is I'm seeing a phenomenon for the first time of I'm wearing out the congregation. I have so many things going on, so many activities, so many projects, so many service projects, so many social events that people are sleeping in on Sundays. And I can't say that there's any less fervor, but I've figured it out. There are limits. There's only so much you can do. And then I basically have to find that mean where I've got people worshiping on Sunday as well as people participating on other days of the week. And I haven't found it yet.
No, we've talked about the rhythm of the church before, and I remember 10 or 15 years ago, there was a new book out called Radical Belief or something like that. And our priest at the time had just read it. And he's like, oh, man, we're not doing enough. At the time, it was a church plant of like 20, 25 people. And we were booking full time at being a church plant. And he said, oh, we got to do more. I said, no, your people here, the average age is like 68 here, Pastor. I don't think they can. We're going to be radical. Didn't work. So I get it. And I think there has to be that natural understanding of life in the church where clearly our life is to be in the church. But at a certain point, there has to be some boundaries. I'm not here to say what they are. That's not my job. I'm just saying that there could be extensive wear on your core congregants that you want to avoid.
And in some ways, this takes us back to COVID, where the rhythm of church worship was broken for 6-9 months a year. Yeah. And not everybody was able to re-enter that rhythm of life of Sunday worship or Wednesday plus a Wednesday or a Tuesday Bible study. And so we've replaced a lot of the people, but some people just faded away. And yes, people like to say, oh, well, they weren't serious to begin with. Well, not everybody's at fever pitch at all times. And I guess I'll always be continuing to learn how to do a better job in my ministry.
Which is good.
I've never quite figured it out yet.
No. In fact, once you do, you retire. I figured it out. Oh, time to retire. All right, on to the news for episode 908. The war has continued, we'll say resumed, in Gaza. As you guys know, Hamas attacked Israel October 7th, about a year ago, and did unimaginable damage and took hostages. Israel went to war with Hamas, which is occupying Gaza, and through attrition and war and death and all that, they finally got Hamas to agree to give some hostages back. There was a full agreement. The full agreement on the table was, over this amount of time, we will give you this many hostages back. You got to give us some prisoners back, and there'll be a swap that happens over time. Well, guess what? After some time passed, those talks have stalled. Well, what do you do if you're Israel? You know it works. What does Hamas understand, George?
Violence.
They understand war, and it's the only way they'll listen is to be under attack, and that's the sad thing. The sadder thing is we have people in the Anglican Communion in leadership roles who think they know better. Well, this is clearly Israel's fault, George. Let's talk about that.
Stephen Cottrell put out a statement blaming Israel for everything. He wrote, "This Israel's resumption of military activity was a callous and unnecessary act of violence which showed scant regard for the sacredness of human life or the principles of international humanitarian law. This offensive must end, and it must end now." Well, let me give you a theological interpretation. Cottrell's a fatuous idiot. There's no criticism of Hamas by Cottrell. He blames Israel for ending the ceasefire, but in fact, the ceasefire ended more than 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Israel had agreed to further U.S.-brokered ceasefire, but Hamas rejected it and refused to release any more hostages. So what's left for Israel? It gave Israel no option but to resume the aerial bombardment of Gaza. Now, Cottrell's sort of Ben Pissant left-wing idiocy, he's not a very bright man to begin with, but his foreign policy thinking is confined to the editorial pages of The Guardian. He can't get past that, or the BBC, and he doesn't see what really is going on in the Middle East, that Israel was left with no choice, and it must do this to end the fighting. See, the leaders of Hamas are not in Gaza. They're in Qatar. They're in other places living in luxury, and they are putting their own people at risk because they don't care. They really don't care.
They don't. And the only way to negotiate with Hamas is through war. That's the only language they speak. They don't speak the language of peace because once this current crisis is over, they're going to build up their armaments again in order to destroy Israel. That's their one goal. Their goal is not to have a prosperous, wonderful Gaza. Gaza will always be a place where they place their armaments and hide their weapons in hopes that one day they can build up enough power and force to destroy Israel. That's their one goal.
Sometimes the answers are not what we want to hear from a touchy-feely worldview, but how come there's no problem anymore in the Sudetenland? Because the Czechs pushed all the Germans out.
They did.
How come we don't have fighting in Algiers? Because the French all left Algeria. Sometimes there has to be these population movements to bring about peace, because when you have these mixed populations that cannot, will not, and refuse to get along, at the end of the day, the only thing that you can do is to separate. And I think this is what is going to happen with Gaza. It's either going to have to be domesticated, or they're going to have to go.
Yeah, I don't want to make that decision. But yeah, I mean, that's the hard reality here, because Hamas itself puts out wonderful press releases for itself. I see here that in recent bombardment, 400 Gazan civilians were killed.
Well, that's a lie. That's a lot because, first off, it's impossible for Hamas to know how many people were killed in the first hours of a bombardment. Second, we don't know how many soldiers were killed versus civilians were killed. And third, the Hamas Ministry of Health, which has been the source of information for the Western press, has been proven time and again to be lying. So I cannot prove that they're being dishonest, but if past practice is any future indicator of performance, they're lying once again. No doubt people have been killed, but who? How many? No idea.
Yeah. But to reiterate, the only reason we had hostages released in the first place is because Israel bombed the squad out of them to the point where they had to negotiate. So, all right, let's go to story number 2. Churchgoers in Norfolk must refer to themselves as rainbow people. This is a story that got cut out last Friday. It was a funny story. We did a great job of delivering the rainbow people. I almost sang the Rainbow Connection.
Rainbows are visions.
But let's get back to the story. Churchgoers in Norfolk refer to themselves as rainbow people and avoid praying to God for help on issues affecting Europe, says a racial justice toolkit promoted by the Diocese of Norwich. Oh boy. What's the story, George?
Well, last fall, the Diocese of Norwich put out this racial justice toolkit, and they have a full-time racial justice officer. And it provided all these ideas and options to how you can integrate racial minorities into the life of your church. Norfolk is 95% white. It's a rural diocese. And this is the place where you have poor vicars with responsibility for 8, 10, 12 rural parishes. And they are now dumping onto these parishes now you have to get the African and Pakistani and Somali residents of your little village involved in the life of the church. Well, first off, there are none. And second, there's no time in the day left for these vicars to do this stuff. And this was picked up by the Daily Mail and the Telegraph last week. And it served as a sort of an statement, the foundational statement of the idiocy of the Church of England, of how out of touch they are. This could be a template for any other topic, but racial justice in a place where there are no minorities to speak of, and spending money when you have a severe clergy shortage, to have more bureaucrats pushing out projects and proposals and papers that nobody will take any notice of. It's just a sample of how out of touch the diocese is, and the Church of England as a whole.
Well, let's just talk. I mean, there's money in our next story that talks about some of the money they can redistribute. It's not like they couldn't buy and pay for some clergy in the Diocese of Norwich, but they're choosing to spend their funds differently. Church commissioners distributing funds for new mission initiatives to dioceses. And we're not talking, I mean, here in America, you would be really lucky if you could get $70,000-$80,000 out of the bishop's office for a project. I mean, it's difficult.
That would be unheard. And national church, people fight over these $5,000, $10,000 grants for projects.
Money is tight. The money's there, but to secure it takes an extraordinary amount of effort. I remember being at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in the early 90s, and some of the vestry people were writing to the diocese or to the national church to get a grant. And the amount of hours put into that grant request, you could have paid for it by going to work at McDonald's for that amount of time. I mean, it's just crazy. So when I read the numbers here, and we're talking £1 billion, billion, that's $1.258 billion US dollars to be distributed between now and 2030. That's crazy. Let's go through the numbers. Carlisle, what are they going to get, George?
this past week, Carlisle was awarded £6.8 million, Chelmsford 14.95, and Rochester £11 million.
Mm-hmm.
And the money's coming out of the Strategic Mission and Ministry Investment Board, or the SMMIB, which is funded out of the Church of England's £10 billion endowment fund. See, how it works is the diocese give proposals to the SIMMB, and if the SIMMB likes what you're doing or proposing, they'll send you the money. But it cannot be for paying clergy stipends, putting a new roof on the cathedral if it's about to fall down, and has to be for new mission and ministry endeavors. Things like fresh expressions and things like that. And see, up to 2017, the old system had been the church commissioners would subsidize essentially failure. If your diocese was falling through the floor with attendance and income, they would make up the difference. Well, people were saying, well, look, this is just subsidizing bad management, bad church practice, just sort of keeping the doors open to keep the doors open. So let's change it and subsidize growth. And the first few projects were pretty good. For instance, they funded these moves by the Holy Trinity Brompton to plant churches, new congregations in defunct parishes across the south of England. So that was a good move. But now it's sort of shifted a bit. So when you go and ask for money, let's say Rochester, and the Bishop Jonathan Gibbs of Rochester made this point in his diocesan address when he announced, hey, we got the money, but we can only spend it in these unnecessary ways. We can spend it on racial justice officers. We can spend it on green initiatives. We can spend it on having composting toilets in every church. But we're not allowed to spend it on having more vicars. We're not allowed to spend it on having fixing, your roof, which is leaking every day, and which, the church has got 25 old ladies. Do they heat it, or do they, shut down for the winter? In other words, Gibbs's point was that even though the money is being given to the diocese, they're only being allowed to ask for it and use it according to whatever fad is popular at the central church offices. So I think the thing is, will these £1 billion return anything?
I don't know.
What are they going to get for their investment?
Okay, well, I doubt, and this is just, Kevin speaking off the top of my head, they will gain 250 new members over this per year for the $250 million per year they're spending. I mean, that's crazy money when you could really be putting some money into bringing alphas into your church, bringing good, strong evangelical tools into your church, fixing the organ of your church, other things than these little strange project. And we're not going to call it SMMIB anymore. It's now the SMIB Council. Okay, let's keep it simple, George. All right, so that's crazy.
Well, it's crazy because the money's there to fund a revival, but what is not there is the leadership at the top to direct this revival, to say, look, give me the money so I can hire 25 young men to go out and be evangelists in the countryside or in the inner cities or this and that. Instead, it's 25 minority people in wheelchairs putting out papers.
But the big fear of the leadership right now in the Church of England is to accidentally hire a conservative priest to bring them into a parish, and they don't mind a parish growing. They do mind a parish growing conservatively, or godly, or orthodox. They don't mind filling the rows with people who aren't going to do anything. But once you get a motivated church together, things can happen that's outside the control of the Church of England leadership, George. So they might accidentally hire a conservative priest. Oh no! So we'll have to look into that. We're about to move on to our third
But
UK
I
story.
don't want to pick on I don't want to pick on the Church of England too much. I mean, the Episcopal Church does this too.
Oh, yeah.
It gets these ideas. If we put, not billions, but we put $250,000 into this project, it will return this much. Never has, never will, because there are ways to prime the pump. But if you go in and tell people this is what you need to do to turn your church around, it's never going to work. But if you basically, if somebody says, okay, if we gave you $30,000 to hire a youth minister, what would it do? Mm-hmm. Or if we basically forgave your parish assessment this year, what would you do with that $30,000, $40,000? What could you do with that to bring more people into the life of the church? Or could you, fix the air conditioning so it doesn't smell like mildew when you walk into the building? When you do this without reference to the actual people at the pews, it's like generals fighting the last army. We have all these armchair generals in Washington and in the Senate and Congress who have all these wonderful ideas of how to fight a modern war, yet nobody's paying any attention to the lessons of the battlefield in the Ukraine, for instance, where drones are now the big thing. Instead, we have to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on fighter aircraft, or $10 million. It's like the problem we have with the Houthis in the Red Sea. We're spending $500,000 to fire one missile to knock out a $300 drone. Okay, who's going to win that war at the end of the day? I mean, maybe we will, because we can spend that money more faster than the Houthis can. But we're fighting the last war because nobody's asking the men and women at the front line, whether it's in the church or in the trenches or in the ships at sea, what do they need to win?
We don't know how to fight a war anymore. We can win a world war, barely, but other than that, we are just not good at that.
Well, look at what Elon Musk did, for instance. The private sector rescued 2 NASA astronauts because NASA either couldn't do it, or some claim Joe Biden wouldn't do it. It requires the private sector to come in and basically fix the space program.
All right, let's move on to some more UK news. Graham Usher of Norwich has dropped out of the Canterbury race. Now, we've been talking on and off for the last couple of months who's going to replace Justin Welby. Lots of names have come up, male and female, and some interesting and not so interesting. One of the ones always in the background was, Graham would be a good pick, especially if you consider the pendulum that the Church of England has understood in picking archbishops in the past. You go with a great Anglo-Catholic like Rowan Williams, then you get an evangelical like Justin, then you go back and you get another Anglo-Catholic like Graham Usher, who's no longer there. Who else are you going to choose for your Anglo-Catholic this time around, George?
Yeah, Graham Usher, well, we don't know what the Crown Nominations Committee is up to, so this is all speculation.
Not here,
but
not an unscripted.
The talk was that Graham Usher was the leading liberal Anglo-Catholic for the job. And if you follow the pendulum theory, Kevin, that you announced, he would be the logical choice. But right now, the candidates that are being talked up most are now all women, who are all liberal, and conservative men. There are no really liberal men left in the running. Now, the conservatives are actually playing this well because the time has come to submit names, and they're submitting a lot of interesting names for consideration. Church of England bishops, even the Archbishop of Sydney, Kanishka Raphael, has been put forward. And these guys are all against living in love and faith. They are for restoring the faith once received. They're for turning the church in England around. And some of these guys are pretty good. And then you have the women. The most prominent is Gully Frances de Coney, the Bishop of Chelmsford. She's a liberal, but she's inoffensive in the sense that she hasn't said or done anything that gets people's back up. This has basically wrecked the odds makers' day because it's pulled out somebody who was thought to be one of the top candidates. So what does this mean? Means It's either going to be a woman or conservative man.
Yeah. Well, but if you look at the politics right now going on in the UK and especially the Church of England, I give a very high percentage to the next Archbishop of Canterbury being of a different chromosome pattern than I have.
Well, if church follows politics, we are seeing, this past week, the Reform Group has fallen apart. It's Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe and all that stuff has basically killed the momentum of the Conservatives. Yeah. And the Labour government, I don't think any politician in British history has been as unpopular as Keir Starmer, maybe Tony Blair at one point. But so it was the Conservatives to win in politics, and they've lost it. And maybe that political pendulum of returning to a more conservative worldview, we've tried the liberalism and it doesn't work. No matter what the conservative, the Tory party really were liberals in American terms. They were far left. Maybe it is time for a conservative, and maybe instead of somebody with different chromosome pattern, maybe that's some of the different ancestry. Kanishka Raphael was brought up and raised as a Buddhist. Yeah, he was educated in England, moved to Australia. This guy would tick a whole number of boxes that the Gully Francis Takani would, except he's a conservative evangelical, not a liberal Anglo-Catholic.
You would agree with me that the last real conservative they had in leadership in the UK was probably Margaret, right?
Politician?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Margaret Thatcher,
yeah,
yes.
Definitely.
I wouldn't call John Major or certainly not David Cameron and Boris Johnson is in a race for unpopularity with Keir Starmer. So, and Boris believed in Boris. I don't think he believed in causes, but
he got stuck because he got stuck because he came right in with the height of COVID, and he was completely ill prepared, like most leaders around the world for a pandemic.
I saw something about Boris Johnson that he has a brand or style as being scruffy. And I saw him. He was on one of the TV shows in the United States, and they had a little, where the commercial's playing, and they're about to go in to show him.
Sure.
And he was messing his hair up before they went live. Instead of George, before the start of this show, George is here with his little green comb, which he put down, trying to get his hair to lie flat. Boris does the opposite. He puts his hand up and pulls it up so he looks scruffy. Probably untucks his shirt too.
That's a rough situation to be in, George. I don't know what that means anymore. To scruff my hair up, I get to pull the beard down.
Kevin, from what I can see on the monitor, all your little hairs are standing up right now.
I do that, It gives me that. I hope. Okay, let's move down under. Sydney Diocese opposes the New South Wales abortion bill. There's a new bill being proposed, and they're going to take away the right of doctors to refuse abortions. If you do refuse an abortion, you better come up with a good excuse and a good recommendation to your patient where they can go get an abortion. And boy, did we dodge a bullet here in America.
Yeah, the New South Wales Parliament is pretty wild right now. They've and in Victoria as well, the laws against free speech, the laws against religious accommodation. Well, the latest thing is in New South Wales, the Parliament, abortion's already legal.
Yes.
But they are basically liberalizing the rules around abortion. As you mentioned, Kevin, a doctor, if he refuses to perform an abortion, must basically recommend them to a colleague who will. And now they want to allow nurses and midwives to perform abortion up to 22 weeks. And the new proposed bill will remove the requirement for reporting an abortion. So you can have a nurse or your midwife do it and nobody will know. And so the abortion statistics will never be accurate ever again in New South Wales because they're not going to be reported.
You're taking yourself You've taken yourself back to the time of the Aztecs. That's crazy.
Well, the Aztecs had pretty poor health statistics, so
Yes.
yeah. No, but I mean the knock-on effect. If let's say you're a doctor and you have moral qualms about abortion, you're not going to be hired by a hospital. You're not going to be hired by a practice because basically the government is saying your practice, your hospital must perform it, and therefore it's always easier for them to hire somebody who'll do it. So basically, you're being forced out of the job market if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor, if you're a midwife. It's just the intolerance of the left once again raising its head that, if you do not agree with us, you're evil and you must be punished.
All
so
right.
Sydney Diocese is taking a stand against this, but I don't know what they'll be able to affect with their government there.
Yeah, there's no safe place. All right, let's go on to story number 6. Archbishop Drexel Gomez. Sorry, Drexel. Archbishop Drexel Gomez has reported that he has stomach cancer. Ouch.
Yeah, we broke this story on Anglican Inc. His family put out a little statement on Facebook earlier in the week, which, I'm Facebook friends, and so I saw it.
Sure.
Drexel Gomez was former Archbishop of the West Indies, former Bishop of Nassau, before that Bishop of Barbados, before that Principal of Codrington College in Barbados, the seminary. He was one of that first generation of Anglican giants, along with Peter Akinola.
Titan, yes, absolutely.
And Henry Arambe and one or two others. But Greg Venable. But Drexel Gomez was the one who termed the coin to the tearing the curtain of the communion. Or what is
torn fabric. Yeah.
Torn fabric of the communion.
Yeah.
Gomez was one of the leaders of the conservative movement. Gomez, was probably the most influential primate of this hemisphere for a good 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
And when he retired, the new Archbishop of the West Indies, they're on a pendulum. They went from liberal to conservative to liberal. So Howard Gregory, or is it Gregory Howard? I can't keep his name straight in my head. That Jamaica is a liberal diocese, and the rest of the province is conservative. And Jamaica is sort of the center, and it either goes from anti-Jamaica and pro-Jamaica, if you want to follow West Indian politics.
That's right.
But we need to pray for him. He's in his high 80s, late 80s, and he's been in the hospital since Ash Wednesday with stomach cancer in Nassau. I'm not going to speculate as to how long he has, but this is one of those things.
For those people who've been watching Anglican TV for generations, if you remember, George and I were in Jamaica for a ACC event, and Gomez was the one who stood up when Ron Williams was trying to change the rules in the middle of some parliamentary procedures. Says, "What the hell are you trying to pull here?" When they're trying to talk about the covenant. And I remember having this on tape, and everybody wanted the tape. Give me the tape. We want to see the tape. Gomez is the one who would not be tricked by Rowan Williams. And he was, one of the titans of the faith, and, he wouldn't fall for it. And I really appreciate that about Drexel. He's a great man of God.
And so I pray for his family. I pray that they have strength, and I pray that his heart be ready for whatever comes next.
Amen. All right, let's move on to the next story. In Americana, there's many great stories. Who shot JR? That's a good one. Absolutely, and
shot Mr. Burns.
Who shot Mr. Burns? There's stuff that Americans will just talk about incessantly because they get it on their mind. And whether it's a conspiracy theory or we just don't know everything about it, or it's just an interesting part of our history, we like to fuss about things. And President Trump said, listen, he said this his first term, I'm going to release all the JFK files. Every last one of them. There'll be no redactions, nothing. You will not see one dark line across any word in the stuff I'm going to put out. And to his credit, he has released, from what I can tell, is 80,000 pages, some of it redacted. I think the redactions were there before he could do anything about it. These are documents from the 60s and 70s. There's no way to unredact it. Whatever. And as Americans, George and I like to talk about this type of stuff because it interests us, it interests the people in our age group. And, I remember having an interest in this in early high school. I was in high school in the 80s. UFOs were a big thing back then. The Bermuda Triangle, I read a couple books on the Bermuda Triangle in the 80s, George. And the JFK thing always hit my interest because of the sensationalism of watching a man assassinated on camera, of watching our hero at the time, Walter Cronkite, break into his news, take his glasses off and say, reports coming from Dallas are that JFK has been shot. Okay, just that's part of our lexicon, our who we are as Americans is that moment in time, repeated again shortly after that with the assassination of MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., and I think that solidifies
Robert Kennedy
and Robert Kennedy.
68.
Yep. And so we have this in our 1960s memory, that in Kent State University, of wow, what is that? How we solve our problems? Now, we want and allow the government to investigate itself to find out what went wrong. And I have read through these files, and in my opinion, they knew so much about this Oswald fellow. They should have had him in detention when JFK was in town. They knew about him beforehand. They knew all this stuff about him, and not putting him in some detained position while JFK is in town was probably foolhardy. Was there a person in the grassy knoll? This report doesn't provide any evidence one way or the other. Was the Warren report correct? Yeah. This kind of throws that out the door. Is there conspiracy? There's always a conspiracy, George. Let's have fun. What's going on with this dump of documents, George?
Well, Tuesday we had our Lenten study. So I went an hour and a half on how to read the Bible and how to use the Bible in your faith development. Then we had the 15-minute Q&A. And what was the Q&A about?
JFK.
John F. Kennedy assassination. 80,000 pages, not all being released. I think 2/3 have been released already. The rest are coming shortly.
Shortly, yeah.
And various people are going through this in various ways. And as you say, no smoking gun, no paper saying we paid Fred Phelps this much money to be on the grassy knoll. But what is coming out are things that just deepen the suspicion that we've not been told the truth. The Russians and the CIA and the Marine Corps said Lee Harvey Oswald was a terrible shot. Okay. And the thing about the magic bullet for the Texas School Book Depository was that it was an incredible shot. So
it was. Absolutely. As a gun enthusiast, that was an incredible shot on target.
Now the neat thing is, if you listen to different people who have advanced knowledge in this, who've been working on and studying this, you'll get different things. So Jesse Walters had somebody on his Fox News show who had been working on this and basically says, here are all the CIA links. Here are the things we know. James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence, had Oswald under watch for 3 years. And all this stuff. Then you had Michael Francis, who's the former Colombo mafia boss, who was became a Christian and got right. And he's saying, at the time his father told him it was the mafia who killed Kennedy, because evidently Joe Kennedy went to the mafia, to the Chicago outfit, and said, we'll back off the Justice Department on the mafia if you give us the state of Illinois. So the outfit gave Illinois to Kennedy in a squeaker of election. And then Robert Kennedy broke the deal by persecuting and prosecuting the mafia. And one of the things that Francis said that, there's a transcript of a wiretap where Sam Giancana head of the outfit in Chicago, saying after the assassination, we killed the wrong Kennedy. We should have killed Bobby, not John, for breaking the deal. Now, is there proof the mafia did it? No.
Yep.
Is there suggestion the mafia did it?
Of course.
A lot. Is there proof the CIA did it? No. Is there suggestion? Yes. Is there proof the FBI was untruthful? Actually, yes. There's plenty of proof about that. But this is going to take a while to digest all this stuff, and more stuff is coming out. But whether it was rogue elements, the CIA, the FBI, the mafia, Cubans, I have no clue. But what it has done is, government, the trust in government right now, after the Biden administration, is at a very low ebb. And the revelations coming out about our government could have done something. At the very minimum, as you say, keep an eye on Lee Harvey Oswald as he returns from Cuba and Mexico.
Where's Oswald today? President's in town. Where is Oswald today? He's the most prominent Marxist, communist, visited Russia and Cuba, and is handing out little pamphlets all day long. Just tell me where he is. Now, I'm not a gun expert. I'm a gun enthusiast. The only thing that you can get me convinced of that maybe it wasn't just Oswald shooting is that he is right-handed. A right-handed shooter puts the rifle in his left hand, puts and holds it like this. Sorry if I have to do this to you. This is how I hold my rifle. Which is great unless you have to lean out a window and shoot to the right. That's difficult. If he were left-handed, I get that. Nobody's ever discussed this. I don't know why. But to get the right angle with your eye lined up, out. Let me back up. I do believe it was Oswald. I'm sorry. But that's the one thing that I would question with my limited expertise is shooting
shots in 8.5 seconds.
I've done that. That's not a big deal.
With a bolt action rifle?
With the leg guard he had? Absolutely. No big deal. However, I'm giving you something. I'm giving you gold here, George. The fact that he could line the sight up right-handed outside of a window, that's impossible. Shooting that many rounds off target, not a big deal. On target, not a big deal. To line that up with your right eye, your right eye is over here. You have to even stick your head out further. That's the goal I'm going to give the investigators. You can't do it. I know. I'm left eye dominant, right-handed, and I know the difficulty. See, I can shoot when I close. That's my left eye. That's my targeting eye, but I'm also right-handed. Makes me a wonderful shot with a pistol, a horrible shot with a rifle. Just small talk we got. So interesting stuff. Are we ever going to get the answer? No, probably not. You know why? Because it's still too fun to talk about. We will always be talking about this, Martin Luther King, Robert, and Kent. Always be part of our talking points. And kind of the fun to go over our history. Who done it? Who did J.R. was killed by his wife, shot by his wife, right?
Pam shot J.R. and Pam. Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns.
That's right. Sorry, guys. We're just horrible Anglican nerds. Story number 8. More, let's see, more than Church of England. Okay. Yeah, there's another sentence from George. It's written
more than 700 Church of England. Move the 700 in front of the church.
I'm going to do that. Okay. More than 700 Church of England vicars have signed an open letter to the Church Times calling for clergy pensions to be increased as a justice issue. Well, then you got to do it. If it's a justice issue, George, you got to do it. Now, recent history, 10, 15 years ago, they used to get 75% of their income in pension. And then it was reduced to 50%. So that's hard because the expenses in England have not decreased. They've continued
2011,
to rise. Yeah.
2011, the clergy pension was reduced from 2/3 to half. And the reason was that they thought they were going to run out of money at the church commissioners. So they did a deal where the pensions were partially pushed onto the diocese, partially paid for by the church commissioners because everybody's run out of money, and the amount paid out was going to be reduced. Well, what's happened since then? Since then, the church commissioners have made billions in income. In fact, they're now flush so that they can now spend £1 billion over the next 5 years on major projects. But the pensions are still at 50%. And the dioceses are all going broke because they have their income does not match their expenses. And so I hate the word justice issue because it's always been overtaken by people with an agenda, but this is a justice issue. If the Church of England wanted to do dirty its clergy, this is how you do it. You have them put 40 or 50 years into service. Then in their old age, you cut in half their pensions just as housing is going through the roof. How many millions of immigrants, legal or illegal, have moved into England? And has the number of houses built over the past 10, 15 years matched that? No, it hasn't. And so the cost of housing for young people and for the elderly, unless they already own something, is just astronomical. Yeah. And so, this is a justice issue of paying, honoring the obligations you made, the promises you made to the clergy who served you.
Well, now different churches have different pension funds. The Episcopal Church has an amazing pension fund. It grew a lot in the late 80s and 90s. I don't remember all the stuff it made its money on. Probably private equity and global equities.
Well, roughly speaking, when I retire, I'll get 50% of the average of my 7 highest years. Let's say I make 125,000 or 120,000 because I can cut that in two. 120,000 divided by 2, meaning I get $60,000 a year, inflation adjusted, for the life of my wife.
Yes, not you,
not just me.
Yeah,
but my wife. So in other words, if truth holds, the Conger family, I'll die the day after I retire, and my wife will live to be 110.
Yeah,
she will have an inflation index pension of half of my highest 7-year salary. And our salaries are all set on little grids and charts. So you can always be paid more. Nobody is. But here are the basic minimums. And that's well funded. But the Church of England pensions, I think the average stipend is £28,000. Mm-hmm. And half of that is £14,000. That's like trying to live on Social Security alone in the United States. It's not you're not moving to the villages in Florida on that, I'm afraid.
No, you're not. No. All right, let's tip with the next story here. Boom. We're getting down to the last couple stories here. In fact, this is the next and last story. Now, in any other time, when the Episcopal Church was actually a place you'd go to get your information, or the leaders of the Episcopal Church were people who knew what they're talking about, this would have been a good story. If the Bishop of New York, Matthew Held, posted something on Facebook, I'd want to know what he said. But those times are gone. The Bishop of New York is the last story. So last that we even debated whether, if we have time, we'll talk about it. He posted on Facebook that this little tyrant little kid from overseas was here on a student visa should be set free. How do you pronounce his name?
Mahmoud Khalil.
Khalil.
Mahmoud Khalil.
I don't pay that much attention to college free speech issues.
He's 30 years old. He is perpetual college student.
Uh-huh.
Khalil, I think, is a Palestinian, maybe have an Algerian passport, but he, after studying in the UK, he came over to the United States to get a master's degree at Columbia. And while he was here, he was on a student visa, and then he applied for a green card and was given a green card. And for some reason, he was fast-tracked on a green card.
It happens.
Khalil has been the leader of the student protests at Columbia in the wake of October 7th, and he has been on film calling for death to Israel, harassing Jews on the campus of Columbia University. How do you know they're Jews? I mean, Jewish students with the kippah and distinctive Orthodox dress, verbally harassing them, occupying Columbia University buildings, fighting with the police.
Including the president's office. I mean, they've done just a tremendous 1960s type of riots here.
The U.S. government, he's not a U.S. citizen.
No.
And the U.S. government reserves the right to remove anybody from the country who is a threat to law, order, peace, and violates the laws. And Khalil's violated a dozen laws. He calls for the overthrow of the U.S. government, for goodness sakes. And so the sort of face, the center of the Columbia, really anti-Semitic. I mean, these people are nasty Jew haters. Mm-hmm. I mean, these people are akin to the 1930s Nazis who would paint swastikas on Jewish shops and beat up Jews in the street. This is one of these guys. This is one of these guys. So ICE arrested him and is going to deport him. Well, they've got some liberal judges saying, oh, well, you can't, you have to give him rights and this and that. And Matthew Hyde, the Bishop of New York, posted on Facebook saying, you shouldn't send him home because this is a free speech issue. I'm sorry, Bishop Hyde. You, like Stephen Cottrell, are a fatuous idiot. These free speech rights.
Hold on, this is George's opinion. Don't go suing us for a lie or slander. This is an opinion. Okay.
Well, I think I can prove this opinion by factual statements. Okay, Hyde doesn't understand the immigration process. And Hyde is basically supporting a pro-murder, pro-rape, pro-torture. The people who murdered the 2 little children last month or whenever they were murdered.
You're being kind. They beat them to death. They beat
them to death?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so. I mean, this is righteous indignation, Khalil said. Well, this guy, nobody has a right to be in the United States unless you're a U.S. citizen. Mm-hmm. And if you're engaging in this these protests and engaging in this violent activity, the U.S. government can send you home at any time.
And I think that's the important thing we need to understand. This is a nation of laws, and the U.S. Constitution does not protect non-citizens. Okay, some liberal judges will say it does, but if I go to any country, I'm not protected by their constitutions. I remember when we traveled to places like Egypt and other places like that, I was warned in letters by the State Department, be careful on your travels. You're not, even as a U.S. citizen, you're not, our laws cover you over there, but their laws cover you more. We can do it again, get you, just be careful, Kevin. Yeah.
It's just like the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police was on the TV earlier this year saying that if Americans say things that violate British speech laws and they're in the UK, they're going to be arrested and prosecuted and to the full extent of the law. Yeah. Now, the things that we would say, I don't have a right to go to the UK and demand that I be treated by American standards. Now, I would hope Britain would change their standards, but I do not have a right to demand that. And you do not have a right to come to this country and violate our laws and be treated as if you were a special case or a child that doesn't know what they're saying or doing. Yeah. It's just one of these cases. Why was this? It's once again the Episcopal Church picks the wrong side. I mean, they're on the wrong side of the transgender movement. They're on the wrong side of the Hamas movement. They're on the wrong side of every major issue. I mean, they support keeping USAID programs going, not because I think it's because they just knee-jerk response to anything conservatives want. They have to be on the other side. They're still involved in DEI. They're still involved in affirmative action. They're still, you know, they're 2 years past the sell-by date on almost every issue.
Decades. But that's the interesting thing when you step back and look at it. I mean, they have replaced God's justice with their own justice. They have replaced the gospel of Christ with their own gospel. And they have replaced the Holy Spirit with the zeitgeist. And so many of these bishops are cowards. They're scared of the angry, nasty people in their diocese, the handful of lesbian activists or transgender activists or Latino activists who try to wag the tail of the church. We had this in our diocesan convention. We had one priest who I think is mentally unstable, who went on this tirade about how we have to do this and that and the other and oppose the administration and everything on sending home illegal aliens. And basically everybody had their hand down like this going, oh my God, this guy's so embarrassing. But
so
they were allowed to speak. You heard what they said. You disagree with it, but here in America, if you are a U.S. citizen, even in your church type environment, we're here to hear your ideas. We're here to correct you where you're wrong, but you're not going to go to jail for that, having an idea, but you're a U.S. citizen. Well,
here's a funny thing, was it last month or the month before that the left was saying that free speech was what led to the rise of the Nazi movement?
Yeah.
Remember when J.D. Vance spoke in Germany and he criticized the European and English UK laws on speech rights, and the people from CBS and NBC and MSNBC all said, well, there's one newscaster saying it was free speech that allowed the Nazis to take power. Therefore,
they didn't have free speech back then. That's yes.
Now when it's the United States, these same people are saying, oh, well, he has to be allowed to have free speech because that's what prevents Nazis from coming to power. Last month, it was what caused them to come into power. The mendacity and the mediocrity of these people is just astounding.
Well, and the lack of knowledge. Germany pre-World War II and I did not have free speech. And what Hitler said, many things he said, was against the law at the time. And that allowed for that spark of interest. Well, he's allowed to, they didn't arrest him for it. And so he's allowed to get away with it. And that led to that little thing that happens when you tell people that you can't do something and they do it. Oh, it becomes exciting. So, well, that's enough for today's show. What do we got? I'm going to look at the time. And if everything worked well, we actually have 57 minutes and 30 seconds of video on tape.
Well, can we spend 2.5 minutes on why I think there was a second shooter?
Oh, sure. No. Well, if you guys haven't seen, I did a refresh of the Anglican.inc website. I brought some of the software up to date, so George would be less frustrated by, Kevin, this doesn't work right. I'll fix it. I finally got around to fixing it. And so go over there and spend time going through some news. We posted a good 20 stories in the last 2 weeks. Lots of good reading. I saw a really good article from Andrew Goddard there about the talking about the choices for the next Archbishop of Canterbury that you and I didn't go to in that detail, but it's nice to see a place you can go and read about that. So you think there's a second shooter, huh? It wasn't you.
No. I think there was somebody in there. The National Archives lost JFK's brain. Then, in other words, they kept the medical evidence in the National Archives, and if let's say Oswald was one shooter that came in the back of the head, what evidence that there was a shot from the front or the side? Now cannot be proven or disproven because the National Archives misplaced the physical evidence.
This is why we'll talk about this forever. We love this kind of stuff. This is so, I would be really upset if we knew exactly the whole truth about JFK, because then what are we going to talk about? I mean, there's nothing to talk about if it's not for our conspiracies.
I wonder where Catherine Jefferts Schori was that day.
Yeah, now you're talking. I'm Kevin Kallsen.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 908 of Anglican Unscripted.